Welcome back to Edge of the Web News. News item that we're covering today. Facebook threatens to leave Europe due to proposed new data sharing regulations. Google Web Stories plugin has been officially released. And did Google just hint at an authority profile? All this today on The Edge.
From the Edge of the Web studios, here's what we're looking at this week.
Welcome to the digital marketing news desk of Edge of the Web, title sponsor Site Strategics. This is the bonus news podcast and video for the Edge of the Web episode 371 with our guest Will Critchlow. Joining me this week is he's going to give his take on the digital marketing news of the day. So, Will, how are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing very well, thank you. How are you?
Oh, good. Starting our Monday off right here in the studio. Will, thanks so much for joining us. It's a pleasure. We had you on about a year and a half ago, and it's always great to be able to have you in the box, so to speak, to be able to talk to some of these issues, and on top of that, just share your information. And when it comes down to SEO, you've been one of the best here, and we certainly would like to dial into some of the news that's happening right now from social media today. Check this out. Facebook threatens to leave Europe due to proposed new data concerns, the data sharing regulations, while TikTok remains on the firing line due to concerns that it may be sharing data on U.S. citizens with the Chinese government. The case may also have highlighted rising concerns globally over data sovereignty and the risks associated with sharing user data between nations. And this is an article from Andrew Hutchinson. Basically, what we're seeing here is Facebook just put out a particular statement based on some European Union privacy regulator information, or they actually sent a preliminary order to Facebook, which called for it to suspend data transfers about its EU users back to the U.S. According to the order, EU officials are increasingly concerned about potential surveillance practices by the U.S. government and are now looking to limit such restricting flow of user information. So this is what Facebook actually said. In an official response to this, if the decision is upheld, it is not clear to Facebook how, in those circumstances, it could continue to provide Facebook and Instagram services in the EU. That's Facebook Ireland's head of data protection and associate general counsel, Yvonne Conan. Will, what do you think about this new particular scenario? Whenever, privacy is a huge concern. Obviously, it was in 2016 with the different accusations of Russian involvement into the elections. But these platforms are under more and more scrutiny of how they use the user's private data. But for EU to actually even put forth a potential limit, and you're right there, dead smack dab in the middle of it. Well, not anymore, but
it's complicated. Let's not get into Brexit.
Absolutely.
Let's just think about the EU side. So, it's fascinating. So I would take anyone's bet on this. Facebook is not leaving Europe. Whoever wrote the headline, I think, is probably overstating the case a little bit here, which and I suspect this is not the author of the piece, the journalist himself. So if you read the statement very carefully, what they said is that they don't know how to comply with these regulations if they're upheld. So if what they're saying is if the EU goes down this path, they don't know how they can operate in Europe. I think they'll find a way.
Certainly.
So, I think that's the upshot. I think what is much more interesting here, and you hinted at it because it overlaps with the TikTok side of things and many other things, is they're not just international bodies; they're kind of supranational bodies now, right? Like Facebook and the like operate globally at a scale we've never seen before, at a scale way beyond any individual national government. It's not entirely obvious why obviously, from a kind of corporate governance perspective, this is an American company in the case of Facebook.
Right.
But you talk about things that Americans hold very dear, like the First Amendment, and you look at that globally and you say, well, that's the First Amendment of the American Constitution. Right. There's no particular reason why that would be the way that it works in India or in the EU or in South Africa or wherever else. And so I think one of the things that this definitely kind of pokes at is I'm not even sure it's logically, theoretically possible to regulate these things when you're looking at fundamentally incompatible legal systems, social norms, pressures, political situations, and all the rest of it. So I think that's more interesting. I suspect what will happen here is that there will be some carve out done, and everybody will get to claim a victory, right? The EU will get to claim that they've tightened up the regulations. Facebook will get to claim that something has changed since this version that they couldn't possibly do, and now they found a way to do it. That's what I think will happen.
Do you think there's going to be more opt-in and user acceptance of use of their data? Is it going to be pushed back onto the user for allowance of that data as a key player? I mean, we're seeing more and more information about data rights, right? And there was just a recent Netflix show, Social Dilemma, which literally covered the principle of entering into this type of transaction, users holding on to their rights and allowing platforms to use it, but having that type of opt-in agreement happening. And it is happening, but it's very legalese, and users aren't feeling...
So that original terms of service that you clicked through in 2007, right? I think the fundamental problem here, as I see it, is that any individual user's data is not worth anything. It's not worth anything to Facebook, but it's not even worth that much to you.
Correct.
The downside of saying, yes, Facebook, you can connect my WhatsApp profile to my Instagram profile to my Facebook profile and see what I like around the web. Users have shown they're not that bothered. And so the problem with regulation that puts the onus on the individual users is they're all going to take that trade-off. They're all going to say, yeah, sure, you can have my personal data, and in exchange, I get to text my family around the world. I get to do video calls. I get to share my pictures and all the rest of it, because that deal is worth it. The challenge comes at the systemic level, where a couple of billion people have said yes individually, and it makes sense to all of them. Mm-hmm. But now Facebook aggregates that entire set of data and becomes very powerful. So I think it is an area where probably there's some regulation needed, though, as I said, it's unclear who gets to do that regulating. And I think I hope that we learn a lot from GDPR, which I think on the one hand showed you can pass essentially national regulation, although it was EU specific, and have it broadly followed globally, and that these multinational, supranational companies will abide by it for the most part. But I think they need to learn from the fact that what you end up with is you just end up with, I don't know if you've browsed the web in Europe, but it's just endless cookie click-through buttons, and everybody just clicks OK. And the problem is that at some point, everybody has clicked OK to a Facebook one, everybody has clicked OK to a Google one. So Google and Facebook now have that permission, and they can just carry on. Whereas if you're a startup or you're a newer business, you maybe don't have that permission yet. And so that is a real hurdle and a real barrier to you. And I think there's a real threat to innovation. And all of these things, they're bad for the big guys. They're bad for Facebook and Google relative to the power they had beforehand.
Right.
But the big problem we have, I think, is that they're good for Facebook and Google compared to a startup competitor who has to jump through all of that same regulatory hoop, but doesn't have the 100 million lobbying budget and the on-staff lawyers and the endless technology teams, and crucially, the scale and scope to have already got that opt-in from hundreds of millions of people. And so I think there's something fun, although I'm kind of supportive of the direction in favor of more privacy focus and more I guess data sovereignty, like you said, that we do get more control and more say over how our own individual data is used. I don't think that's sufficient, actually. But it's a hard problem because it's not clear who gets to do that regulating and how you would even make a consistent regulatory environment.
Yeah, across all different countries as well. Yeah,
across all different countries. I mean, it's bad enough to even do it across all different states in the US, right? Like, you look at what California wants to do and compare that to, basically any other state, or certainly any other non-coastal state. And you kind of say, well, okay, is it a lowest common denominator thing? Is it highest common denominator thing? How do we mix these? And I think what GDPR has taught us is that the first mover regulator will get to shape this to a large degree. So
define the entire model. Yep. Absolutely. But our personal data is of no value, like you said, unless there's a marketplace for it. So the big platforms bring the advertisers, and that's where the small startup also loses out because they don't have incentivization, that motivation to be able to create this model that would comply with different regulatory bodies, right? So you're in another catch-22, is that if you're even trying to start up a new marketplace, a new platform, right, like a Parler,
you probably couldn't do it.
You can't do it.
You probably couldn't do it. No, you know, if you were to start DoubleClick today,
yeah,
that would look entirely different to the regulatory environment that they got started in and that they sold to Google in what was it, 2007, 2009, whatever that was.
Yep.
I don't know how you compete with that today.
No, you can't. So the game certainly has changed and evolved over the years. But data privacy and explicit user permission is going to be the coin of the realm here going forward. We just don't know how it's going to play out collectively on a global level.
I think it's that collective thing that's really key there, and that global aspect. And I think every time it's really fascinating watching the TikTok stuff play out and looking at the asymmetries. So you know, some of the things that you hear coming out of business leaders or politicians in the US saying must happen for TikTok if they're going to continue operating, if they're going to continue to be you know, Chinese owned but operate in the US. But of course, the rest of the world is looking at this saying, well, you know, Facebook is US owned, Google is US owned, and you're going to keep on operating in our environments. So should we have those same concerns? Are you telling us that we should have those same concerns? And I think, is it just a marketplace thing? Is it just is it an economic clout thing? You know, the size of these businesses hold sway, or is it a, you know, geopolitical power thing? You know, the US,
or is this the canary in the coal mine? Yeah, absolutely. Is the government, the U.S. government, actually challenging not only privacy concerns, but not utilizing security as the main reasoning why they're challenging this. But that could very well be the model in which they're looking at Google, looking at Facebook as well. And boy, would that be a huge 2021 scenario here. And in fact, there's a U.S. judge that halted the TikTok ban hours before it was actually set to start. I think it was on Saturday, as it was, I think, the 27th and 26th of September here. Anyway, there's a lot of things up in the air right now. So privacy is a huge concern. There's a lot of focus on these big tech platforms and what they're doing with user data, obviously. So let's calm down on that a little bit and talk about a nice little story here. So Google Web Stories. If you haven't come across that, it's a WordPress plugin. They just got officially released. It has been beta for a while. They actually have just officially published the Web Stories WordPress plugin. It's easy to create web stories and get more site visitors. So basically, it's a scenario in which you can publish vertical content, and I hate the whole vertical video, vertical picture content, but you know what? Everybody can't seem to take a picture turning their phone the right side, so we're just going into the vertical video syndrome yet again. But anyway, you've got 5 or 6 pages of images that you can actually create with limited text, but they have a really cool editor to be able to create content, and I think it's to be used alongside your content, and it has the ability to rank in very certain search positions here. So Google's giving us another way to visually push content, and it could very well hook into some new visitors that haven't seen your SERP, but are actually seeing your web story first and foremost. I mean, we've got such a large industry of visual platforms that could actually work its way into an Instagram or a Pinterest environment as well. Will, what are your thoughts about this kind of? It's very rudimentary, this visual editor, but what do you think about these web stories? Does that fit into the mold of SEO tactics, or is this more of a peripheral that we can possibly adopt, but it's not too critical?
I mean, time will tell. I think right now it's a thing to keep an eye on. I love this kind of innovation. It's just, I think it's good. It's good for the web. It's good for the digital environment to try new things and see what sticks. For me personally, it's interesting. You don't like the vertical orientation. I don't have a problem with that specifically, but I am not a user of stories really on any platform. So I'm a very active Twitter user. say very active. I don't know about compared to very active Twitter users, but Twitter is the platform I use more than any other.
Certainly.
And of course, that doesn't have story format. And so, I've just not really. I personally haven't really engaged with stories as much. So I haven't done a lot on Instagram or which I think it was Instagram and Snapchat that did it first, right? And so I find it a little. I don't know. I find it a little unintuitive. Maybe that's just lack of familiarity. I'm never quite sure whether I'm going to go forwards or backwards when I tap, and whether I can swipe, or whether I'm just going to lose my place entirely. And so, for me personally, the stories format isn't my preferred way of consuming content, but I don't think that's what the question is here, really. I think obviously it resonates with many people, and I think moving those things to native web formats is like I say, a great experiment. If it takes off, that's phenomenal. I think the more open it can be, the better. Seeing it in WordPress, which still powers double-digit percentages of the web, right?
Absolutely,
is a phenomenal place to see whether there is adoption for it. In terms of whether you should leap on it, I think if it makes sense for your brand and your audience, experiment with it. I wouldn't feel forced into it necessarily. And like I said, I generally like the innovation. I like the idea that we collectively try these things, try new stuff out, and who knows? The one thing that I would love to see, to the extent we can, but to see things collectively pushed for is just to make them as open as possible. I think we're still reaping the rewards of the surprising openness of the web, and the fact that there's probably some things that are, when you look back on them, are essentially coincidences or random chance,
right? That
led to so much of the web being built on open APIs, open source software, all the rest of it. And of course, Google is built on that. The fact that Google can just crawl the web in a kind of permissionless way. So I think anybody who's got any control over it, I'd love to see it pushed in that direction. But from a creative standpoint, I like it.
It's kind of non-obtrusive, and it gives you an opportunity to be able to hook a user that maybe otherwise didn't see your content. These web story formats are actually showing up in Google Search, Google Images, Google Discover, and the Google app. So
Discover is the interesting one, I think.
Yeah.
That's the one that feels to me most new, in the sense of most different to things that we're otherwise used to.
Right.
And I think just because it feels like its popularity is just caused by Google, right? This is not in any sense organic. This is not in any way a feature taking off. This is Google saying, "Oh, look, we control everybody's Chrome,
go over here,
and everybody's search app on their phones. We're just going to send some people some content, see what happens." And so, I'm not wild about the, I guess, black box nature of that,
right?
But but on the flip side, as a user, I quite like it. I can't really figure it out. I find, for me personally, I don't know about you, my own experience of this is it's a funny blend of spookily accurate. Like, how did they know that I was going to, like, that is literally the best article for me to read next on the web,
right?
In some weird intersection of things I'm interested in, and then other times it's kind of some random celebrity content that is obviously just generically popular, but has nothing to do with any of my interests. And
unless they're trying to introduce that to you and be able to sculpt that interest, right?
Yeah,
there's always that.
There's a range of possibilities, but so again, sure, test it, try it out.
See,
I think what I haven't seen yet, what I haven't seen as a marketer is I haven't really seen anybody. I haven't seen any great marketing tactic content for Discover. I don't know about you. I have seen one or two people digging into what seems to have been popular, but it doesn't seem like anybody's really
planting their flag there. Right.
Every kind of set of analytics that I've seen looks super random. It's certain things get picked up, they get a massive luck of the draw, traffic and so forth. It's like old dig homepage type stuff.
All right. Well, before we get to the last article here, we certainly do want to thank our sponsors. Ahrefs is a continued sponsor for the show. Ahrefs is a fantastic tool set to be able to analyze your competitor data and see where they're getting their traffic from, as well as what pages and content they're actually ranking, and the inbound links that those competitor pages have. So what a great analysis tool to be able to see all that and be able to deconstruct and be able to build a better strategy for your online success. So go over to ahrefs.com, silent A, Ahrefs, and you can start your trial today. It's 7 days for $7. Fantastic tool set. You get full, complete use of the application, and you see some great data. Analyze yourself as well as your competitors, and you'll immediately see some great things that you can do for your, again, online success. All right, jumping out of here, let's go back to something that is very interesting. Morty Oberstein jumped into Search Engine Journal. Check this out. Did Google just hint at an authority profile? A recent blog post from Google points to defining a paradigm on the SERP with what we know now as a core update. So here's the deal: is that occasionally Google actually hits a keyboard and churns out a new post that explains what goes on behind the scenes. At times and we're going to talk about that actually a little bit more in the show today. At times these posts are meant to serve as general introductions to a given topic, and other times Google uses this blog to update the industry at its latest advancements. Well, this is exactly what happened on September 10th when Google's Danny Sullivan and Pendu Nayak simultaneously released blog posts on reliability and quality of the SERP. And to jump into it here, the extract that Morty's pointing out here, and this is very, very important, especially as we've been talking about EAT, E-A-T, expertise, authority, and trust. There's a quote in the blog: for topics where quality information is particularly important, like health, finance, civic information, and crisis situations, we place an even greater emphasis on factors related to expertise and trustworthiness. We've learned that sites that demonstrate authoritativeness and expertise on a topic are less likely to publish false or misleading information. So if we can build our systems to identify signals of those characteristics, we can continue to provide reliable information. The design of these systems is our greatest defense against low quality content, including potential misinformation, and is the work that we've been investing in for years. Now, we're going to have an interview with Will regarding the last 15 years of search evolution here, and this actually is kind of the most recent edifice of a growing understanding inside of search of what they're looking at from an authority standpoint of what's quote unquote good content or valuable content as opposed to others. So, Will, this is right in your lane here. What do you think about this article that they're actually starting to define what authority is in a manner of speaking, and what type of signals that they're looking for?
Yeah, so I think firstly we need to probably separate what they're doing here is they're defining authority signals, or they're talking about authority signals. I think the underlying concept of what they think they mean by true authority, underlying authority, if you like, probably hasn't changed dramatically. Over decades, they still would give the same examples of the big websites and the like. I think we have to see this. That there's, if you think of the kind of classic SWOT diagram, this is both. This is in many of the quadrants. Mm-hmm. There's opportunity and threat going on here simultaneously. Mm-hmm. I think on the threat side, they're clearly seeing the way that they get their feet held to the fire by regulators, when they're hauled in front of the politicians in the US and in Europe. It's examples of misleading content. It's examples of fake news or whatever it might be, or just those kind of spot examples where they seem to have misled the user that they really suffer for. Mm-hmm. So I think part of this is, and you can even break that down further. So part of this is, I guess, authority theater. They want to be saying to authorities, look, we're to the regulators, look, we're doing the right things and we're on it. We're working on this. Yep. And part of it is real. Part of it is we've actually made progress, and I'm sure they're very proud of some of that progress they've made. That's the threat side. On the opportunity side, I think they're a few years in now to the machine learning age. So right. You mentioned that in the kind of my look back over decades plus is. The latest one is this idea of much more machine learning in the core organic ranking algorithm, which they shied away from for years because they wanted it to be explainable. They wanted they wanted to at least internally know why certain things were outranking certain other things, and they to some degree give that up when they move to machine learning. And I think that's probably the one critique I would have of this kind of analysis, this kind of thinking about their announcement, is to the extent that we believe the underlying announcement, which is Google is doing this with machine learning and massive neural network models, we shouldn't probably seek to put human layer understanding on the top that says things like, I forget some examples, like loan websites that had too much sales copy on their, quote unquote, informational pages.
Right.
Suffered.
Large interstitials and things like that. These are
that
things.
Might be true. Right. That might be true as an outcome, but I'd be very, very, looking at most machine learning models, the things that it discovers are not necessarily human labelable, if that makes sense. So they'll be very high dimensional, very abstract concepts. And the computer will have, I don't think you've seen, there was some fascinating research where some concepts do bubble up. So for example, they showed YouTube to a machine learning model and asked it to, with very little contextual training. So they didn't really teach it anything about what was in the videos. It was just a bunch of pixels. And they asked it to categorize videos into groups without really giving it any context about what they were looking for. They just said, go find some interesting groups. And it basically discovered the concept of a cat. So it became a classifier that said, here are the cat videos and here's the other videos. And that's a rare example in my experience of where that kind of deep machine learning model spits out a categorization that is a thing we have a word for. We have a word for cat. We have a concept for cat. Oftentimes, you could easily imagine it coming up with a categorization that was much, much higher dimensional and much less like a thing that we just have a word for. And so I think over time, I would expect to be less able to explain why a particular website was or wasn't included in the set of winners or losers of a particular update like this, right, in terms of its attributes. Right, so it'll be harder,
human associated attributes. Yeah, I see.
Absolutely,
I see what you're saying.
Whereas I think what we'll fall back on is we'll have to say things like, we just have to shoot at the objective. We just have to go, okay, well, Google is saying that they're aiming for the authority here, and they want the most trustworthy sites possible. The way we do better is to become more authoritative and more trustworthy. But we'll be less able to say they tweaked this dial or they hit that website or this website,
right.
And so it's difficult for us tactically as marketers. I think strategically we're still aligned, right? We're still trying to, most of these things are very aligned with the things that we've wanted to do since 2002.
It will allow us to actually see a set of connections that we don't regularly see subjectively, right? But the removal of the subjective colloquialisms as well as labeling and kind of evaluations from the human side of things will let the machine learning go rampant unless we truly give
rampant's a really interesting word for it, because we're going to see some bugs. Yep. I think we're going to see, and I think we already have seen some of this. There's been some weird cases where particularly like international content has done, the wrong country's content has ranked in a different country, or there've been these funny kind of edge cases, which I bet if we could really quiz some of the Google engineers behind the scenes, when they've dug deep enough into it, they found there've been machine learning bugs, right, essentially in some cases. I think the other thing that I would say about this, which is less related to the EAT and more just related to the kind of core update side of things, is there's been a little bit of debate recently. I think John Mueller and Gary might have contradicted each other at some point, but that there's this concept that we've definitely seen in the wild, that if you suffer in one core update, you very likely won't see a recovery until the next core update,
right? Which
is new, or well, new is old. It's back to the early days of Google and the idea of times like the Google dance and those kinds of things, where you had to wait for a whole thing to recalculate, right? So it wasn't just make your change, wait for Google to recrawl, reindex and go, which is kind of where we got to in and 2014, 2015, where they'd rolled out caffeine, they'd rolled out all these kind of real-time processing updates, so that actually a lot of this stuff was happening, maybe not in real time, but in minutes or at most days. Some of this stuff apparently is now kind of not backing out until they rerun their entire algorithm, their batch
It's a
processing.
full deep learning model right there, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think it means they've overfitted. So I think that they're essentially learning overfitting to the current shape of the web. And so they learn that website X is or is not trustworthy, but it kind of gets stuck. It overlearns that particular website is that much trustworthy, essentially. And then even if you change the dials behind the scenes and the attributes that supposedly are the indicators of trustworthiness, it's not until they retrain the model that they actually pick that up.
It's still imprinted. It's still imprinted with that level of authority. Yeah, exactly. I see what you're saying there. So we're now actually going to be subject to whenever the deep learning model decides to shake it all off and kind of rethink the entire.
Everything old is new again. I'm sure the next thing is that they'll release some way of doing deep learning iteratively and on the fly, so that they don't have to recalculate the whole thing.
Well, that's what we saw with any type of link penalties or anything coming from
everything has gone from being batch to being real time.
Absolutely.
And I think this will just be the next thing.
All right. Well, we certainly appreciate your insight there, and obviously Morty's insight. He's calling for the watch out of super authorities. So in the midst of all of this, if Google's actually putting together the model for these type of super authorities, then we should be paying attention to that as well. Unless the core update rethinks everything and kind of reboots itself again.
Yep.
All right. Well, with that, we certainly appreciate your time on the news. We're going to make sure that our listeners tie into the full interview with Will Critchlow here. Make sure that you check out everything that we are talking about on the news section. All the links to these articles are right there at the show page. So we certainly appreciate anybody who's liking and commenting on the show, and we certainly would appreciate any type of reviews for Edge of the Web, because that's how you tell us if we're talking in your lane. So from all of us over at The Edge, stay safe, stay well, and do not be a piece of cyber driftwood. We'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.